What if some of the greatest rock albums ever made were ignored, dismissed, or outright hated when they first came out? What if the records that shaped entire generations of musicians never got their due from the mainstream? History has a way of picking winners and losers, but sometimes it gets it wrong. Tonight we're going to dig into 10 albums that were overlooked in their time but are begging for rediscovery. These are the records that carried the fire, even when the world wasn't listening. And once you hear their stories, you'll wonder how they ever slipped through the cracks. The Stooges, Raw Power, 1973. Imagine an album so feral that even David Bowie couldn't tame it. That's Raw Power. Iggy Pop and the Stooges at their most unhinged. Bowie was brought in to mix the record, and even he admitted he barely managed to wrangle its chaos. Critics at the time hated it. Rolling Stone's 1973 review called it a colossal waste. Sales were abysmal, but buried in that noise was the birth of punk rock. Every snarling riff, every scream from Iggy's throat became scripture for bands like the Sex Pistols, Nirvana, and Guns N' Roses. Henry Rollins once said buying the record at 12 rewired his brain. Decades later, Axl Rose convinced Columbia to reissue it, claiming it was his favorite album of all time. Today, it doesn't sound old. It sounds dangerous, exactly as it should. Big Star, #1 record, 1972. They had the sound of the Beatles, the heartbreak of Dylan, and the innocence of teenage suburbia. Big Star's debut should have taken over the world. Instead, their label Ardent botched the distribution, and hardly anyone could find a copy. The cruel irony? The album was called #1 record, but it didn't even chart. Chris Bell, the band's co-founder, left soon after, crushed by disappointment. Years later, Paul Westerberg of The Replacements wrote the anthem Alex Chilton as a tribute, singing, "I never travel far without a little Big Star." REM openly cited them as a guiding light. When Rolling Stone finally revisited the album in the 2000s, they ranked it among the greatest records of all time. Every shimmering guitar line and aching vocal became the DNA of alternative rock. What was ignored in 1972 is now the blueprint of an entire movement. David Bowie, Outside, 1995. By the mid-90s, Bowie was no longer the darling of critics. Grunge had taken over. Britpop was everywhere. And then he released Outside, a sprawling, dystopian concept album about art crimes, virtual reality, and a murder mystery. Too weird for radio, too dark for MTV, it confused just about everyone. But Bowie never played it safe. Working with Brian Eno, he devised a surreal creative process. He wrote characters, invented backstories, and improvised in the studio until songs emerged from the chaos. Critics at the time dismissed it as pretentious. But listen today, and it feels chillingly modern. Bowie sings about identity, technology, and obsession like he saw the 21st century coming. Trent Reznor was so taken by it that he toured with Bowie, performing Outside songs nightly, calling it brutal and beautiful. The world wasn't ready in 1995. Now it feels prophetic. Lou Reed, Berlin, 1973. How do you follow up a glam rock masterpiece like Transformer? If you're Lou Reed, you release the bleakest concept album imaginable. Berlin was a rock opera about addiction, violence, and the collapse of love. Critics were merciless. Rolling Stone's original review slammed it as a disaster. Reed himself later admitted the backlash left him shattered. But over the years, musicians and fans came back to it, drawn to its brutal honesty and cinematic storytelling. Producer Bob Ezrin pushed it to extremes. He recorded a children's choir in a way that made them sound terrified, and then had his own breakdown during production. For decades it lived in infamy, until Reed performed it in full in 2006 with an orchestra, finally receiving standing ovations. What was once reviled is now seen as one of the darkest masterpieces in rock. Kate Bush, The Dreaming, 1982. Before Running Up That Hill made her a legend, Kate Bush nearly destroyed her career with The Dreaming. It was her first self-produced album, and she went wild with it. Sampling, layered vocals, bizarre arrangements. Critics dismissed it as mad and self-indulgent. Even EMI executives begged her to make something more commercial. Instead, she followed her instincts. She used the Fairlight CMY, one of the earliest digital samplers, long before most artists touched it. She wrote songs about Aboriginal land rights, bank robbers, and Houdini, not exactly radio fare. The British press mocked it, calling her weird for the sake of weird. But decades later, Bjork said it inspired her to push boundaries, while St. Vincent called it one of the most important records ever made. What sounded messy in 1982 now feels visionary. The dreaming wasn't a failure, though. It was a blueprint. Tim, 1985. The Replacements had one shot to break into the big leagues. They had the songs, they had the momentum, and then they got a producer who stripped away their raw fire. Tim is full of classics, Bastards of Young, Left of the Dial, but the production felt flat compared to the band's chaotic live shows. Fans loved it, but the mainstream shrugged. Their reputation as lovable screw-ups didn't help. They infamously got themselves banned from Saturday Night Live by playing drunk and swearing on live TV. Yet the heart of Tim is undeniable. When Rolling Stone revisited it, they placed it in their 500 greatest albums list. In 2023, a deluxe reissue with a new mix revealed just how powerful it always could have sounded. Flawed, messy, but unforgettable, just like the band itself. King Crimson, Discipline, 1981. When King Crimson returned after a 7-year break, nobody expected this. Gone were the sprawling prog epics. In their place came Discipline, an angular, precise, almost alien record. Robert Fripp's guitars tangled like spiderwebs. Adrian Belew added strange textures, and the rhythms drew on African and gamelan influences. Fans of classic Crimson didn't know what to make of it. But listen closely, and you hear the birth of math rock, post-punk, even Radiohead's DNA. Belew had just toured with Talking Heads, and you can hear that influence in the jittery grooves. Tony Levin introduced the Chapman stick, a strange instrument that gave the record its hypnotic pulse. Even Robert Fripp himself later admitted that Discipline was Crimson's boldest reinvention. What confused audiences in 1981 now feels like the missing link between prog and alternative. Jane's Addiction, Ritual de lo Habitual, 1990. If the late 80s hair metal scene was about excess, Jane's Addiction took that chaos and turned it into art. Ritual de lo Habitual was wild, mixing punk, funk, psychedelia, and raw confession. The cover art was banned in some stores for being too explicit, forcing the band to release a plain white version with the First Amendment printed on it. Songs like Stop and 3 Days were sprawling, theatrical trips through sex, addiction, and transcendence. Critics were divided. Some hailed it as genius, others called it incoherent. But its impact was undeniable. Perry Farrell used the momentum to launch Lollapalooza, turning a farewell tour into a cultural revolution. Without this record, the 90s alt-rock explosion might never have happened. Red Hot Chili Peppers, Tool, and countless others owe it a debt. It deserves to be remembered as a turning point. Smashing Pumpkins, Adore, 1998. Coming off the massive success of Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, Billy Corgan had the world at his feet. So he did the unthinkable. He ditched the heavy guitars. Adore was a dark, electronic-tinged, piano-heavy album about loss and transformation. Fans expecting another bombastic rock opera were confused. Sales plummeted. But the backstory matters. Drummer Jimmy Chamberlin had been fired after a heroin-related tragedy, and Corgan had just lost his mother. The songs are drenched in grief. For Martha, written for his mother, is one of the band's most devastating epics. Critics at the time called it a misstep, but years later Pitchfork praised it as the misunderstood heart of the Pumpkins catalog. What sounded like failure in 1998 now feels like one of Corgan's most daring and personal statements. Queens of the Stone Age, Like Clockwork, 2013. Not every overlooked album is decades old. In 2013, Queens of the Stone Age released Like Clockwork after Josh Homme nearly died from surgical complications. He spent months bedridden, questioning whether he'd ever make music again. Out of that darkness came this album, drenched in mortality, regret, and survival. Unlike their earlier desert rock stompers, this was slow, moody, and introspective. Guests included Elton John, Trent Reznor, Dave Grohl, and Alex Turner, yet the record still felt like Homme's confessional. Critics admired it, but it didn't hit the mainstream like No One Knows. Yet for many fans, it's their masterpiece, a midnight drive through life and death itself. Homme later said writing it was like bleeding into the tape. As rock fades from the charts, Like Clockwork proves the genre still has depths to explore. Every one of these albums was misunderstood when it first dropped. Too raw, too weird, too dark, too experimental. And yet, those very qualities are what make them timeless today. Rock history isn't just about the hits that climb the charts. It's about the outcasts, the rebels, the albums that refuse to play by the rules. These records didn't just survive obscurity, they planted seeds that would grow into entire movements. Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, and even the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame have slowly begun to reappraise them, proving that sometimes legends don't arrive on release day. They wait for us to catch up. Which of these albums have you rediscovered? Which ones do you think deserve a second life? Drop your picks in the comments, and let's give these forgotten masterpieces the audience they always deserved. And if you want more deep dives into the hidden history of rock, make sure to subscribe, because the story of rock isn't finished. It's still echoing, waiting to be heard.